Hello, my name is Ethan Kwecki, and today I'll be presenting on depictions of good and evil in Outlaw King. So as a quick intro, the things I'll be going over and the main topic I'll be speaking on today is we'll be looking at imagery to see how the director uses the imagery in the movie to portray the characters as either villains or as good guys. And at the same time, we'll be comparing this to medieval imagery and medieval artworks. So the first two images from the movie that we'll see here come from the very beginning of the movie when the Scots are surrendering to the English throne. On the left you see Robert the Bruce kneeling before King Edward I, and in this position we see Robert the Bruce as very conquered and defeated in that prostrate position, with his hands clasped in between that of the king. And then on the far right is the second scene from the movie that is also at the very beginning, where King Edward is launching a catapult that he had just built into a castle. This castle had actually just surrendered to the English. However, King Edward wanted to try and use his new catapult just to see what it would do. This imagery really furthers the director's goal in making King Edward appear as the villain, doing something so heinous as firing on a already surrendered enemy. In the middle we have a excerpt from one of the prayer books from Prince Philip the Fair, which was a French prince. And in this scene we see David and Goliath, and we can see a lot of similarities between the imagery in this opening scene of the movie and in the image of David and Goliath here. First and foremost, David is a small shepherd boy that is appeared and shown to be much smaller than that of his rival. Now we could see this on the left. Robert the Bruce and David are both in positions where somebody would think maybe not ideal or inferior. Also, maybe they represent them both being an underdog. And on the right, we see Goliath in the image from the prayer book, as well as in the image from the movie, we see King Edward. Both are wearing a red tunic with chainmail armor, which is period correct armor in what they would have been, or what they would have actually worn back in medieval times. Goliath is also much taller than David, showing his strength and power, and once again affirming that David is the underdog, much like in the movie. King Edward appears much taller in this opening scene and much larger, just to impose the underdog feel on Robert the Bruce. Ultimately, this helps the viewer and the director convey the idea that we want to root for the underdog to overthrow the unjust king who had just launched a catapult at a surrendered fortress. The next image that the director uses that really furthers the agenda to show Robert the Bruce as the good guy in this movie is the crime against God. Robert the Bruce is meeting with John Crome here in this scene to try and get him to unite forces and revolt against the Scottish king. However, John has a different agenda and wants to turn in Robert the Bruce because John and Robert are the two only rightful heirs to the Scottish throne. So John sees this as an opportunity to have a power grab and claim the throne for himself. Ultimately, what this does is it leads Robert no choice but to murder John Crome on the step of the altar, which back then was a heinous act and would be today as well. So this is something that people in medieval times would not view in a very good manner at all. Some of this proof we can see in the depiction on the right, which is from St. Nicholas Church in Soria, Spain. And what this depicts is the murder of Thomas Becket, Thomas Becket was very vocal against the English crown back in the day, according to Danny Wood from BBC News. Ultimately, King Henry then had him murdered on the altar, and we can see the depiction here. According to Wood, when King Henry's daughter married a Spanish prince and moved to Spain, she erected this church, St. Nicholas, in Spain as a way to pay for her father's crimes or to show penance. What this event shows is how serious this crime was, and maybe Robert the Bruce isn't the good guy that the director wants to show him as. However, the director justifies it by connecting Robert the Bruce murdering John Crome with the murder of William Wallace, one of the main Scottish freedom fighters that everybody can recognize in pop culture today. But overall, the imagery that the director used is very similar to that of the imagery in this medieval church found in Spain. You have one man stabbing another man on the altar of the church. Well, on the right it's in the back, and then on the left in the movie it was right through his throat. So very brutal indeed, and maybe not the best actions for Robert the Bruce to take to start off his rebellion. And next I'll talk about the use of armor to symbolize the good and evil in the movie. So to find period correct pieces of armor is pretty difficult in this time, but I found this statue called Akomanli in the form of a mountain knight from Germany. And here we could see a knight riding on a horse. It's not very clear, but he has chainmail armor on with a tunic covering it, and then a helmet on, which is pretty standard for this time. I also read a description by Bribing in a medieval historical journal, and in this he describes what typical armor would have looked like at the time. And he says, quote, "It would comprise of mail shirt, attached hood and gauntlets, as well as mail leggings, on top a long tunic, and a pot helmet." So very similar to what we see in the movie and what we see in this statue. On the left we can see Robert the Bruce, very normal attire with that tunic covering up the mail, and then just a regular pot helmet on his head. On the right we see King Edward II. He once again is wearing chainmail, that is, a tunic, and then the chainmail around his head. He does have an additional shoulder pad or shoulder shield, and according to Bribing, this was unique in medieval period to French armor, which is very intriguing as to why the director would have used it here for an English king. It could be to symbolize that this is not the rightful English king. Rather, he is the enemy of the English, much like the French have historically been the enemy of the English back in these times. And it goes to further show that Robert the Bruce is the good guy in this film. In addition, this image on the right is a little hard to tell, but King Edward II, his color pattern on his tunic is black and red, which is somewhat not typical to what you would have seen in a royalty's battle armor. According to Bribing, the royalty would have wore blues, reds, and golds, so a lot more lighter colors. So overall, just the darker colors on King Edward do once again cast a negative light on him and his personality. It is intriguing, however, that on this next slide on the left from the movie you can see the English knights. Their armor greatly differs from that of their king. It's more traditional and more in line with the description. On the right we can see the Scots in their armor and tunics, and they look more shepherdly, as they would since they were mostly Scottish herders from the Highlands. But it's very interesting that the armor of the English differ from their kings so greatly. It could be because the director wants to separate the English knights from their king in a way to show that he's not the rightful ruler or not really part of them. The next major piece of imagery that the director uses and casts King Edward in a negative light is the dragon banner. So King Edward II comes to his father, King Edward I, and suggests that he should raise the dragon banner to fight Robert the Bruce. And what this means is that when they raise the dragon banner, they no longer have to abide by the rules of chivalry. So a lot of people at first seeing this movie might think there's no way that's historical. It's kind of too made for Hollywood. However, through some research and reading, I found an article in The National, which is a Scottish newspaper, in which it cited that the dragon banner was first used by Normans in their invasions in the early, around 1000 AD. 1000 AD. But then afterwards, the English also picked it up and used it as well. The first use of it was by King Henry III in 1244, and that was the first use by an English king. And then the English continued to use the dragon banner over the years and up through Robert the Bruce's era. On the right, we can see a medieval depiction of the dragon banner in the Bayeux Tapestry, which is in France. And this is depicting the Battle of Hastings and the death of Harold. So on this, we could see a Norman carrying the dark shield, and on his stick is a dragon. And that would be the dragon banner that many historical accounts allude to. So it does differ in image compared to that in the movie, but overall they are very similar. So in conclusion, the director did use imagery in a very successful manner to depict King Edward I and II as evil. He uses a lot of color schemes, such as dark reds, which are typically associated with evil, to highlight their sinisterness. And they also show them doing things such as raising the dragon banner and throwing out the rules of chivalry in order to fight Robert the Bruce. The movie also has a lot of parallels to medieval art in the imagery, especially in the fighting and different scenery that you can compare to medieval paintings and such. And overall, it uses a lot of different similar angles that medieval paintings would have used, and which I've shown in this presentation. Here are my works cited. Thank you.